The phenomenon of Ukrainian Cossackdom is not simply a chapter in the military history of Eastern Europe. It forms a deep cultural, social, and state-building foundation of the Ukrainian nation. Emerging at the turn of the 15th and 16th centuries, in the specific geopolitical conditions of the Great Steppe frontier, Cossackdom rapidly transformed from a scattered borderland occupation into a formidable military force, and eventually into a distinct political estate that raised the banner of sovereignty and freedom. Origins and the birth of Cossackdom. The word Cossack traces back to a Turkic root, originally meaning something close to a free, independent person, an adventurer, a masterless warrior, or a guardian of the frontier. The rise of Cossackdom grew out of a tangled set of social, economic, and geopolitical pressures acting on the same stretch of borderland at once. Growing feudal dependency and the steady tightening of serfdom across the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth pushed peasants and townspeople to flee toward the unsettled southern lands, a vast borderland known as the Wild Field, where no lord's authority could easily reach them. At the same time, a policy of Polonization and forced conversion to Catholicism across Ukrainian territories provoked real resistance among the Orthodox population, many of whom sought a measure of protection and autonomy out on the frontier, beyond the reach of both church and crown. And the frontier itself was never safe. The southern steppe faced a constant threat of raiding from the Crimean Khanate and the Nogai horde, forcing the residents of border towns such as Kaniv, Cherkasy, and Bratslav to master the arts of war simply to survive. Cossacking began, in its earliest form, as a seasonal occupation rather than a military calling. People went out onto the steppe to fish, to hunt, to gather salt, and to collect falcon nests for trade. Constant clashes with raiders eventually forced these seasonal wanderers to band together into armed companies and to build their first fortified camps, simple wooden barricades known as chaika, out on the open steppe. By the middle of the 16th century, the Polish-Lithuanian crown had begun to see a practical use for these armed frontiersmen, and formally organized a segment of them into what became known as the registered Cossacks, a paid military formation tasked with guarding the southern border in exchange for legal recognition and a fixed stipend. That registration process, however, only ever recognized a fraction of the men actually living the Cossack way of life on the frontier, and the tension between the registered elite and the far larger body of unregistered Cossacks would shape Cossack politics for generations to come. The Zaporizhian Sich, a democracy on the steppe. The center and living symbol of Cossack freedom became the Zaporizhian Sich, a military and political organization based beyond the Dnipro Rapids. The earliest known Sich is traditionally identified as the fortress built by Prince Dmytro Vishnevetsky on the island of Mala Khortytsia in the 1550s. The Zaporizhian Sich entered history as a genuinely unique example of a Cossack republic, built on principles of direct democracy rarely seen anywhere else in early modern Europe. At the top of this system sat the Military Council, or Rada, the supreme governing body in which every Cossack held an equal vote regardless of rank or wealth. The Rada decided questions of war and peace, elected and, when necessary, removed the Cossack leadership, and divided access to land, fishing grounds, and other shared resources. Day-to-day authority rested with the Kosh Ataman, the elected leader of the Zaporizhian host, who held supreme military, administrative, and judicial power in the period between one Rada and the next. He was supported by a small council of officers. A military judge responsible for justice, a chancellor who ran the Sich's written records and correspondence, an aide-de-camp responsible for discipline and order, and a quartermaster who managed supplies and artillery. Authority itself was represented through a set of physical symbols known as the kleinety. A banner, a mace called a bulava that marked the authority of a hetman or Kosh Ataman, a horsetail standard called a bunchuk, a seal bearing the image of a Cossack with a musket, a ceremonial staff called a pernak, and a set of kettledrums used to summon the council itself. Life inside the Sich rested on a genuinely radical principle of equality. All hereditary privilege and feudal dependency were abolished the moment a man crossed into Sich territory. Any man could join the Cossack Brotherhood, regardless of his social origin, provided he professed the Orthodox faith and agreed to submit to the Sich's own body of customary law. That law could be extraordinarily harsh: theft from a fellow Cossack, murder, or betrayal of the brotherhood carried severe punishments, including execution by clubbing or, in the gravest cases of betrayal, being buried alive alongside the victim. The art of war and Cossack weaponry. Ukrainian Cossacks built one of the most effective military systems of their era, blending Western European tactics with techniques adapted directly from steppe warfare. Among their most distinctive tactical inventions was the wagon fort, or tabor, a unique fortification technique used both on the march and in open battle. When threatened in open steppe terrain, Cossacks arranged their supply wagons into several tight rows, forming a square or rectangle and lashing the wagons together with chains. The result was a mobile fortress, capable of absorbing repeated charges from heavy cavalry while the Cossacks fired from cover between the wagons. At sea, Cossacks used shallow, highly maneuverable rowed boats known as chaikas, vessels up to 20 meters long that could carry crews of 50 to 70 men. In these boats, Cossack raiding parties crossed the Black Sea to strike Ottoman fortresses along its coast, including Sinop, Trabzon, Varna, and Ochakiv, and even reached the outskirts of Istanbul itself, often freeing captives held there as slaves during these lightning raids. Cossacks were also skilled military engineers, capable of digging trenches and raising earthen redoubts quickly, and of using mining and controlled underground charges to bring down enemy fortifications during a siege. The Cossack infantryman's primary weapon was firearms, muskets, self-loading matchlocks known as samopoli, and pistols. Through coordinated volley fire, a well-drilled Cossack unit could sustain several shots per minute, a rate of fire that made Cossack infantry genuinely formidable against cavalry charges. Alongside firearms, Cossacks carried sabers, spears, wore hammers known as chekins, and bows, and fielded a range of light artillery, including small cannons called falconets and heavier matchlock wall guns known as hakivnitsi. Notable figures of the Cossack era. The history of Cossackdom produced a series of towering figures who shaped the course of Eastern European history well beyond the borders of the Sich itself. Petro Sahaidachny, who lived from roughly 1570 to 1622, stands as one of the most consequential hetmans and military strategists the Cossacks ever produced. He reorganized the Cossack host into something approaching a regular standing army, and organized a string of successful naval campaigns against the Ottoman Empire. His forces played a decisive role in the Battle of Khotan in 1621, helping to halt a major Ottoman advance into Central Europe. Beyond the battlefield, Sahaidachny took an active interest in culture and education, formally enrolling the entire Zaporizhian host as members of the Kiev Epiphany Brotherhood, an institution dedicated to Orthodox learning and religious life. Bohdan Khmelnytsky, who lived from 1595 to 1657, became the founder of a Ukrainian Cossack state known as the Hetmanate. He led the Great National Liberation War of the Ukrainian people against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, fought between 1648 and 1657. A string of decisive victories, at Zavtivadi, Korsun, and Pilyavtsi, allowed him to build a genuinely functioning state structure, complete with its own court system, treasury, territorial administration, and independent diplomacy. Facing continued pressure from Polish forces and searching for a durable protector for his young state, Khmelnytsky negotiated an alliance with the Tsardom of Muscovy in 1654, formalized at a council held in the town of Pereyaslav. Over the following decades, successive tsars steadily narrowed the autonomy the Hetmanate had originally held under that agreement, a slow process of centralization that would eventually bring the entire Cossack state under direct imperial administration. Ivan Mazepa, hetman from 1639 to 1709, was both a skilled diplomat and a major patron of the arts. He worked to steer Ukraine away from the growing influence of the Muscovite Tsardom, and during the Great Northern War, he entered into an alliance with King Charles XII of Sweden against Peter the Great of Russia. Mazepa left a substantial cultural legacy, sponsoring the flourishing of a distinctive architectural style now known as Cossack Baroque, and significantly expanding the Kiev Mohyla Academy into one of the most important centers of higher learning in the Orthodox world. Ivan Sirko, who lived from roughly 1605 to 1680, became a legendary Kosh Ottoman of the Zaporizhian Sich, remembered in Cossack tradition as having fought in more than 50 battles without ever suffering a defeat. In Ukrainian folk memory, he remains a symbol of the unbreakable spirit of the Sich and of the distinctly Cossack character known as characternictvo. The characterniky, myth and reality. A particularly vivid strand of Cossack tradition surrounds the characterniky, sometimes called znakari or folk sorcerers among the Cossack ranks. Folk legend credited them with a range of extraordinary abilities, the power to stop bullets with their bare hands, or catch them in the fold of a coat. The ability to pass through solid walls, or to see across vast distances using mirrors, the power to transform into wolves or other animals, and a form of hypnotic power capable of confusing or misleading an enemy in battle. Setting the folklore itself aside, the historical reality behind the characterniky points to genuinely skilled scouts, trackers, and battle-hardened veterans. Men steeped in early forms of martial arts, folk medicine, herbal treatment, and psychological technique, including practices resembling hypnotic suggestion used to unsettle an opponent. These men were known for their ability to recover quickly from serious wounds and to survive for extended periods under the harsh conditions of the open steppe, skills that, filtered through generations of storytelling, eventually took on an unmistakably supernatural cast. The transformation and dissolution of Cossackdom. Following the fracturing of the hetmanate during a prolonged period of civil conflict known as the Ruin, and the signing of the Truce of Andrusovo in 1667, Cossack territory was split between rival powers. On the eastern bank of the Dnipro, an autonomous hetmanate survived for a time, though it steadily lost its rights and privileges under mounting pressure from the Russian Empire. In 1775, on the order of Empress Catherine the Great, Russian forces under General Peter Tekeli surrounded and destroyed the Zaporizhian Sich. Some of the surviving Cossacks fled south across the Danube, establishing a new community known as the Danubian Sich under the protection of the Ottoman Empire. Over the following decades, the imperial government dismantled the office of hetman entirely, along with the traditional Cossack regimental administrative system, and gradually converted most Cossacks into either ordinary peasants or regular cavalry regiments within the imperial army. A portion of the old Cossack host was eventually reorganized into the Black Sea Cossack host, and later the Kuban Cossack host, which went on to guard the empire's southern frontier for generations. One remarkable document survives from this turbulent period, the Constitution of Pylyp Orlyk, adopted in 1710 by Cossack exiles serving under Mazepa's successor as hetman. Drafted in Latin and Ukrainian, the document laid out a formal separation of powers between the hetman, a general council, and an elected assembly, along with guarantees limiting the hetman's authority and protecting the rights of ordinary Cossacks. Historians studying constitutional history frequently point to it as one of the earliest written constitutions in Europe to formally limit the power of a head of state, predating similar developments in Western Europe by decades, even though it was written by a government in exile and never actually took effect on Ukrainian soil. Cultural and spiritual legacy. Cossackdom left a deep imprint on the psychology, folklore, and culture of the Ukrainian people, one that has long outlived the political institutions of the Sich itself. The Cossack era gave rise to a distinctive musical and poetic genre. Historical songs and epic ballads known as dumai, performed by traveling minstrels called kabzari and bandrasti, who accompanied themselves on stringed instruments as they sang of great deeds, of longing for a lost homeland, and of the ongoing struggle for freedom. These oral epics functioned as a living historical archive for a people who, for long stretches of their history, had limited access to their own written record of events. A recurring folk image, known as Cossack mamai, hung in the form of a painted icon in nearly every Ukrainian home, often displayed alongside religious images of saints. It depicts a philosopher Cossack seated beneath an oak tree, playing a bandura, his horse standing nearby, sometimes with a jug of drink at his side. A composite folk symbol blending martial valor with a contemplative, almost meditative wisdom, understood by generations of Ukrainians as an idealized self-portrait of the national character. That same legacy is woven directly into the symbols of the modern Ukrainian state. The national coat of arms, depicting a Cossack armed with a musket, and the words of the national anthem itself, which speak of showing the world that we, brothers, are of Cossack stock, both draw a direct, unbroken line back to this Cossack inheritance. The Ukrainian Cossack is far more than a military or historical figure confined to old chronicles. He stands as a foundational archetype of Ukrainian identity itself. One built around a love of freedom, a capacity for self-organization, a willingness to defend one's own land, and an unbreakable spirit in the face of any invader.